Welcome to This Explainer. I am absolutely thrilled to guide you through this today because we're looking at a truly fascinating blueprint for understanding the hidden forces that drive, well, pretty much everything we do. If you've ever wondered why you just can't resist hitting the snooze button or why a specific ringtone instantly makes your heart race, you are definitely in the right place. Today, we're unlocking the science of behavior.
Okay, let's dive into this. First, we'll pin down exactly what behavior is. Then, we'll compare respondent and operant conditioning, map out the ABCs of behavior, unpack reinforcement and punishment, and finally, look at the sheer power of reinforcement.
Section 1. What is behavior?
Before we can figure out why we act, we really have to know what an action actually is. So, what actually is a behavior? Think about it. If you're just sitting on the couch, worrying about an upcoming deadline, are you behaving?
Well, according to the pioneers of behavioral science, like B.F. Skinner, the definition is incredibly specific. Behavior is the portion of an organism's interaction with its environment that involves observable movement. And that word observable, that's the golden key here. It absolutely has to involve an interaction with the environment, and it needs physical movement that someone else can actually see or measure.
So let's clear up a common myth right away. Things like walking, eating, or typing, those are behaviors. But static states, internal emotions, or just being tired, not behaviors. To put that into perspective, imagine a woman named Sarah at a busy grocery store. She's feeling completely overwhelmed and anxious. Now, being anxious isn't the behavior, but suddenly turning around, ditching her shopping cart and speed walking toward the exit, that physical, observable interaction with her environment, that is the behavior.
Section 2. Respondent versus operant conditioning.
Now that we know what a behavior actually is, how in the world do we learn new ones? Well, there are two primary pathways, respondent and operant conditioning. Ivan Pavlov championed respondent conditioning, which is all about involuntary reflexes triggered by a preceding stimulus. Think of a reflex that just happens automatically, no thought required. B.F. Skinner, on the other hand, focused on operant conditioning, and this is all about voluntary actions driven by a history of consequences. Basically, we do things because of what happens after we do them.
Now, what's really interesting about this is how Pavlov proved you can actually learn entirely new physiological reflexes. In his famous experiments, dogs naturally salivated when presented with an unconditioned stimulus, food. But Pavlov started introducing a completely neutral stimulus, like just the sight of a lab coat, right before the food. Eventually, the dogs learned to associate the two. The lab coat became a conditioned stimulus, triggering that salivation all on its own, literally with no food in sight.
Let's look at a hilarious modern-day example to make this stick. You might recognize this from a certain famous TV workplace comedy. Imagine a coworker offers you a mint, an unconditioned stimulus that naturally makes you put your hand out. But every single time they offer the mint, they play a computer reboot noise. Mint, reboot noise, hand out. Mint, reboot noise, hand out. Over time, that completely neutral reboot sound becomes a conditioned stimulus. They play the sound, and you instinctively put your hand out without even thinking. It's wild, but that is respondent conditioning in action.
Section 3. The ABCs of behavior.
But what about the things we actively choose to do? To understand voluntary actions, we use a really simple framework called the three-term contingency, or just the ABCs. It goes exactly like this. A is for antecedent, the trigger that happens immediately before the behavior. B is for the behavior itself, the observable action. And C is for the consequence, the event that follows right after. Every single voluntary operant behavior you do is essentially sandwiched right between a trigger and a result.
And honestly, out of those three, the consequence is the real boss. In operant conditioning, consequences are manipulated to make a behavior more or less likely to happen in the future. They're either going to strengthen, maintain, or totally weaken a behavior.
And this brilliantly illustrates how it works. Let's look at a pop culture classic, Sheldon and Penny from The Big Bang Theory. The antecedent? Sheldon indicates he wants Penny to be quiet. The behavior? Penny actually stops talking and moves out into the hall. The consequence? Sheldon immediately hands her a chocolate. By manipulating that consequence, Sheldon is literally shaping her future voluntary behavior, making it highly, highly likely she'll be quiet the next time he signals her.
Section 4. Reinforcement and punishment.
So Sheldon used chocolate as a tool to shape Penny's behavior. In behavioral science, we categorize these tools into a very clear, absolutely crucial binary. Reinforcement is any consequence that increases the future likelihood of a behavior. Punishment is any consequence that decreases the future likelihood of a behavior. That's it. Reinforcement always builds a behavior up, while punishment tears it down.
Which brings us to the famous behavioral quadrant. Now, we've got to totally rewire how we think about the words positive and negative here. In this science, they do not mean good or bad. Positive just means you are adding a stimulus. Negative means you are taking a stimulus away. So positive reinforcement means adding something to increase a behavior, like giving a kid a sticker for finishing their homework. Negative punishment means taking something away to decrease a behavior, like, say, taking away a teenager's phone because they were texting in class.
Let's look at an everyday example of negative reinforcement. You're fast asleep, and your morning alarm starts blaring. You smack the snooze button, and that annoying sound stops. The removal of that terrible noise reinforces your behavior. Tomorrow morning, you are highly likely to hit that snooze button again because it successfully helped you escape a really unpleasant stimulus.
Section 5. The power of reinforcement.
Let's move to this and see how it builds. While both reinforcement and punishment are constantly active in our lives, behavior analysts lean really heavily on reinforcement for lasting change. Reinforcers can be classified by their physical properties. They can be edible like a snack, tangible like a toy, an activity like screen time, social like high fives, or sensory like listening to music. But here is the absolutely critical part. Reinforcers are intensely personal. What motivates one person might totally backfire for another. If you give a really shy student loud public praise for a good grade, that social attention might actually act as a punishment and completely decrease their participation.
We can also categorize reinforcers by how they actually get their power. Unconditioned reinforcers are basically tied to survival. Things like food, water, warmth. I mean, you don't have to learn to want an ice-cold drink on a 100-degree day, right? Conditioned reinforcers, however, are learned. A little plastic token or a piece of green paper we call money means absolutely nothing on its own. But through stimulus-stimulus pairing, which is repeatedly pairing that neutral token with access to actual things you want, it becomes a highly powerful, generalized reinforcer.
So the crucial point here is that whether we realize it or not, our environments are constantly shaping us through these exact mechanisms. Everything from the push notifications on our phones to the smiles from our coworkers. They are all consequences driving our next move. I want to leave you with this. Think of one specific action you took today. Was it driven by a desire to gain something or to escape something? Look closely, because once you see the science of behavior at work in your own life, you can never, ever unsee it. Thanks so much for joining me on this explainer, and keep observing.